The Black Stallion had killed 2 men already, and Wade Norwood figured he'd be the third if he tried to break him the way everyone else had. The horse stood in the center of the corral under the scorching August sun of 1882, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian, nostrils flaring with rage and fear as ranch hands lined the fence, placing bets on how long their boss would last. Wade removed his hat and wiped the sweat from his brow, studying the animal with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. He had paid good money for this stallion at an auction in Carson City, believing his years of experience could tame any beast. 3 weeks had passed since the horse arrived at his ranch outside Lone Pine, California, and Wade was no closer to riding him than the day he'd first laid eyes on the creature. The ranch hands whispered that the devil himself lived in that horse's heart, that no mortal man could ever break his spirit. "Boss, maybe we should just cut our losses," called out Frank, Wade's foreman, a weathered man of 50 with more scars than stories. "Send him to the slaughterhouse before he kills someone else." Wade shook his head. Something in the stallion's eyes told him the horse wasn't evil, just terrified and angry. But terrified of what, he couldn't say. The animal had excellent bloodlines, should have been worth 3 times what Wade paid. Yet here he stood, magnificent and utterly untouchable. The sound of hooves on the dusty road leading to the ranch caught Wade's attention. A lone rider approached, and as the figure drew closer, Wade realized it was a woman. She sat astride a painted mare with the kind of easy grace that spoke of someone who'd spent more time in a saddle than in a parlor. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical braid beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and she wore split riding skirts that would have scandalized the church ladies in town, but made perfect sense for anyone who actually worked with horses. Wade walked toward the fence as she dismounted, noting the way she moved with quiet confidence. She was young, probably mid-20s, with sun-kissed skin that suggested she spent most of her time outdoors. Her green eyes surveyed the ranch with an assessing gaze before settling on him. "I heard in town you had a horse that needed gentling," she said without preamble, her voice low and steady. "I'm Rose Fallon." Wade couldn't help but notice the collective scoff from his ranch hands. A woman, thinking she could handle what they couldn't. He was about to politely decline when she turned her attention to the Black Stallion in the corral, and something shifted in her expression, a softening that made her features almost luminous. "What happened to him?" she asked, still watching the horse. "Don't rightly know," Wade admitted, moving to stand beside her. "Bought him at auction. Previous owner died, estate sale. The auctioneer said he was wild caught in Nevada, partially broken, but something set him off. Killed a stable hand who tried to use a whip on him, then the previous owner's son who came at him with a branding iron. They say he's cursed." Rose shook her head slowly. "He's not cursed, he's remembering." Wade found himself intrigued despite his skepticism. Remembering what? Pain, fear. Whatever broke him the first time broke him wrong. She finally turned to look at Wade, and he felt something unexpected twist in his chest at the intelligence and compassion in her gaze. "I can help him, but I need time, and I need your men to stay away from him while I work." "Miss Fallon, I appreciate the offer, but that animal is dangerous. I've got experienced horsemen here who couldn't get within 10 feet of him without getting charged." I noticed. There was no mockery in her tone, just statement of fact. "That's because they approached him like he was something to be conquered. He needs to be understood." One of the younger ranch hands, a cocky kid named Jimmy, laughed outright. "Lady, you don't understand nothing. That there's a killer horse and you're just going to get yourself trampled." Rose didn't even glance at him. Her eyes remained fixed on Wade, waiting for his decision. Up close, He could see the fine lines around her eyes, the calluses on her hands, the way she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who'd earned her confidence through hard work rather than bravado. She wasn't some society girl playing at ranch work. This was someone who knew horses. He could sense it in the way she'd already assessed the stallion, noted the scars on his flanks, the way he held his weight, the tremor in his muscles. "Where'd you learn about horses?" Wade asked. "Grew up on a ranch in Wyoming. My father bred them, trained them. He taught me everything before he passed. I've been working ranches up and down California for the past 3 years, anywhere someone needs a difficult horse handled." She paused, then added, "I've never lost one yet." Wade made a decision that his practical side told him was foolish, but something deeper, something instinctive, told him to trust. "What's your price?" "Room and board while I work and $50 when I'm done. If I can't gentle him in 2 weeks, you don't owe me anything." "And if he kills you, then I suppose I'll have broken my record." The corner of her mouth lifted slightly, the first hint of humor she'd shown. Wade extended his hand. "Deal. You can stay in the guest cabin. It's not fancy, but it's clean and private." Her handshake was firm, her palm warm against his. "I'll need to start now. The longer he stews in fear and anger, the harder it'll be to reach him." The ranch hands dispersed with varying degrees of grumbling and speculation. Wade sent Frank to prepare the guest cabin while he showed Rose to the corral. The black stallion watched their approach with wild eyes, tossing his head and stamping. Rose stopped a good distance from the fence, not moving any closer, just standing and watching. "What's his name?" she asked after a long moment. Wade realized with some embarrassment that he'd never bothered to name the horse, had just called him the Black, or that demon horse. Before he could answer, Rose spoke again. "I'll call him Midnight. He looks like darkness given form." They stood in silence as the afternoon sun beat down. Wade had work to do, a ranch to run, but he found himself reluctant to leave, curious about what this woman would do. Minutes passed. The stallion gradually stopped his agitated movements, though his attention never wavered from Rose. She didn't move, didn't speak, just breathed steadily and watched him with what Wade could only describe as peaceful attention. "You're not going to do anything?" he finally asked. "I'm doing something. I'm letting him know I'm not a threat, that I'm patient, that I can wait as long as he needs." She glanced at Wade. "You have work to do, Mr. Norwood. I'll be here a while. Wade, if you're staying on my ranch, you might as well use my given name." "Wade, then. I'm Rose." She smiled properly for the first time, and Wade felt that unexpected twist in his chest again, sharper this time. He forced himself to walk away, to attend to the 1,000 tasks that demanded his attention on a working cattle ranch. But throughout the afternoon, he found his gaze drifting toward the corral where Rose stood, still as a statue, while Midnight gradually became accustomed to her presence. By the time the sun began its descent toward the Sierra Nevada peaks to the west, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the stallion had stopped watching her with quite so much intensity, had even turned away a few times to nose at the water trough. Frank found Wade checking on the breeding mares in the north pasture. "That girl is still standing there, been 3 hours, just standing and watching. She knows what she's doing," Wade said with more confidence than he felt. "You sweet on her already?" Frank asked with the bluntness of someone who'd known Wade since he was a boy learning to ride. "Don't be ridiculous. I just met her." Frank's weathered face creased with amusement. "Uh-huh. And that's why you've looked toward that corral about 50 times in the past hour." Wade didn't dignify that with a response, but as he rode back toward the main house, he detoured past the corral. Rose had finally moved, was sitting on the ground now about 20 feet from the fence, her back against a fence post, still watching Midnight. The stallion was grazing on the hay scattered in the corral, no longer paying her any obvious attention, but Wade noticed he always kept her in his peripheral vision. "You should eat something," Wade called out. Rose looked up at him, and in the golden light of the setting sun her eyes seemed to glow. "Is that an invitation to dinner? The hands eat in the bunkhouse, but you're welcome to join me in the main house. My housekeeper, Maria, sets a fine table. I'd like that." "Give me half an hour to wash up," Wade nodded, painfully aware of his own dust-covered state. "Same here. I'll have Maria set for 7. The guest cabin was small but comfortable, with a bed, a washstand, a small stove, and a rocking chair by the window. Rose had been given rougher accommodations in her travels, and she appreciated the clean sheets and the pitcher of fresh water waiting for her. She washed quickly, changed into one of her 2 good shirts, a cream-colored cotton that was only slightly faded, and ran a brush through her hair before rebraiding it. The main house was built from timber and stone, sturdy and practical like everything else about the ranch. Maria, a Mexican woman in her 60s with kind eyes and efficient hands, greeted Rose warmly and showed her to the dining room where Wade was already seated. He'd cleaned up as well, his dark hair still damp, his shirt pressed. He was a handsome man, Rose acknowledged, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of rugged features that came from hard work and honest living. His eyes were a striking blue, pale as a winter sky, and when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that was both unsettling and pleasant. "How was your first session with Midnight?" he asked as Maria brought out plates of beef stew, fresh bread, and roasted vegetables. "Productive. He's afraid, but he's also curious. That curiosity will be what saves him." Wade leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You really think you can gentle him?" "I know I can. The question is whether he'll trust anyone else after I do. Some horses, once they've been broken so badly, they'll only ever accept one person. You might have paid for a horse you can never ride. Then I'll have paid for his peace." "That's worth something." The simple statement, delivered without false heroics or pride, made Rose reassess the man sitting across from her. Most ranch owners she'd worked for saw horses as tools, valuable but ultimately replaceable. Wade spoke as if the stallion's well-being mattered beyond his monetary worth. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Wade asked, "You said your father taught you. Does your mother work with horses too?" Rose's expression shuddered slightly. "My mother died when I was born. It was just me and my father until I was 21. I'm sorry, don't be. I had 21 good years with him, more than some people get." She broke off a piece of bread. "What about you? This is a substantial ranch for one man. It was my father's and his father's before him. They settled here in the 50s, built it up from nothing. My father died 5 years ago, left it all to me. My mother moved to San Francisco to live with my sister. She never much liked ranch life." Wade's voice carried a hint of old pain. "I have 2 brothers, but they had no interest in staying. Thomas went east, became a lawyer. Jacob headed to Arizona, working silver mines, so it's just me." "Lonely," Rose observed. "Sometimes." Wade met her eyes. "But it's home. I can't imagine living any other way." Rose understood that sentiment deeply. Despite the hardship and uncertainty of her itinerant life, she couldn't imagine being confined to a city, to walls and streets, instead of open sky and horses. They talked through dinner, conversation flowing more easily than Rose had expected. Wade was intelligent and well-read, despite his rough exterior, and he listened when she spoke rather than simply waiting for his turn to talk, a rare quality in her experience. After dinner, Rose excused herself, citing an early start the next morning. Wade walked her to the cabin, the night air cool and crisp, Stars scattered across the sky in brilliant profusion. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the ranch. "Thank you for dinner," Rose said at the cabin door. "Thank you for trying to help Midnight." Wade hesitated, then added, "I hope you'll join me for meals while you're here. Gets tiresome eating alone." "I'd like that," Rose said, and found she meant it. She lay awake for a while that night, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for sleep. Somewhere a horse whinnied softly, and in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. Rose thought about Midnight, about the fear and rage she'd seen in his eyes, and she thought about Wade, about the loneliness she'd recognized in him because it mirrored her own. She'd learned not to get attached to the places she worked or the people she met. Her life was transient by necessity, moving from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to put down roots. It was safer that way, easier to leave when the work was done. But something about this place, about Wade, made her wonder what it might be like to stay. She pushed the thought away and closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. The next morning, Rose was at the corral before dawn, sitting in the same spot as the evening before. Midnight was lying down, unusual for a horse as wary as him, but he lurched to his feet when she arrived, watching her with renewed suspicion. Rose settled herself and waited, letting the sunrise paint the sky while the ranch came to life around her. Wade found her there an hour later, still motionless. He didn't interrupt, just went about his work. The ranch hands gave her a wide berth, though Rose could feel their skepticism like a physical weight. She didn't care. She'd encountered it before, this assumption that a woman couldn't possibly understand horses better than men who'd worked with them for decades. She'd stopped trying to prove herself years ago. The work spoke for itself. By mid-morning, she stood and slowly approached the fence. Midnight tensed, but didn't retreat. Rose climbed up to sit on the top rail, still not entering the corral, just getting closer. She began to hum, an old lullaby her father used to sing, letting the melody drift across the dusty space between them. Midnight's ears swiveled toward her, tracking the sound. She sat on that fence rail for 3 hours, humming and occasionally speaking softly, nonsense words, just letting Midnight get used to the sound of her voice. When she finally climbed down, her legs were stiff and her back ached, but Midnight had moved closer, was now grazing only 15 feet from where she'd been sitting. Wade appeared with a canteen of water and a wrapped sandwich. "Maria insisted," he said, handing them over. Rose accepted gratefully, suddenly aware of her thirst and hunger. "Thank you. How's it going?" "Well, he's listening now." Wade watched the stallion with a thoughtful expression. "I've been working with horses my whole life, and I've never seen anyone approach it like this. Most people want to break a horse's will, make it submit. But a horse that submits out of fear is never truly gentle. It's just waiting for a chance to rebel or run. A horse that trusts, that chooses to cooperate, that's a partner. That's what I'm trying to build with him." "Is that what your father taught you?" Rose nodded, taking a long drink from the canteen. "He used to say that gentling a horse was like courting a woman. You had to be patient, had to earn trust, had to show respect. Force might get you compliance, but it would never get you loyalty." Wade's mouth quirked. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." Rose looked out across the ranch at the mountains rising beyond, purple and majestic in the distance. He would have liked this place. Something in Wade's chest tightened at the wistfulness in her voice. He wanted to ask her to stay beyond the 2 weeks, wanted to know more about her, wanted to understand the shadows that sometimes crossed her face. But he held back, aware that he barely knew this woman, that she was here to do a job and nothing more. The days fell into a rhythm. Rose worked with Midnight for hours each day, gradually moving closer, eventually entering the corral but never approaching him directly. She would work around him, cleaning out the water trough, spreading fresh hay, always calm and unthreatening. Midnight watched her constantly, his fear slowly giving way to cautious interest. In the evenings, Rose joined Wade for dinner. They talked about horses and ranching, about books they'd read and places they'd been. Rose learned that Wade had a dry sense of humor and a surprising knowledge of poetry, could quote Whitman and Dickinson from memory. Wade learned that Rose had traveled as far as Montana and Texas, that she loved thunderstorms and hated crowds, that she read everything she could get her hands on and had opinions about everything from politics to philosophy. On the fifth day, Midnight let Rose touch him. She'd been sitting in the corral, reading aloud from a book of Tennyson's poems Wade had lent her, when the stallion walked over and lowered his head to sniff at her. Rose barely breathed, continuing to read in that same steady voice, and after a moment, Midnight allowed her to rest her hand on his neck. Wade, watching from outside the corral, felt his heart lodge in his throat. The sight of Rose's small hand against Midnight's gleaming black coat, the trust implicit in that simple contact, moved him in ways he couldn't fully explain. Over the next few days, Rose gradually increased her contact with Midnight. She groomed him, speaking softly all the while, working through the mats in his mane and tail, checking his hooves, running her hands over his body to find every scar, every tender spot. She discovered marks from whips, from spurs, from ropes that had been pulled too tight. Each discovery made her voice soften further, her touch more gentle, until Midnight would lower his head and close his eyes when she approached, seeking her hands on him. By the end of the first week, Rose was leading Midnight around the corral on a rope, his movements docile and trusting beside her. The ranch hands stopped their betting and started watching with genuine interest. Even Jimmy, the cocky young hand, approached Rose one evening to ask how she'd done it. "Patience," she told him simply, "and respect. He's not an object to be used. He's a living being with feelings and memories. I treated him like that, and he responded." Wade found himself watching Rose as much as he watched Midnight. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the profound gentleness in her every action, it all drew him like a moth to flame. He'd known beautiful women before, had even been briefly engaged once to a banker's daughter in Independence who decided ranch life wasn't for her. But Rose was different. She was strength and softness combined, practical and poetic, and every day he found new reasons to admire her. On the evening of the 8th day after dinner, Wade walked Rose back to her cabin as had become their custom. The night was warm, the air filled with the scent of sage and pine. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager to end the evening. "I could ride him tomorrow," Rose said quietly. "He's ready." Wade should have been pleased. This was what he'd hired her for after all, but instead he felt a pang of something like grief. Once she rode Midnight, once she proved the job was done, she would leave. She'd said 2 weeks, and they were more than halfway through. "That's good," he managed. "That's real good." Rose stopped walking and turned to face him. In the moonlight, her eyes looked almost luminous. "Wade, I need to tell you something." His heart began to beat faster. "What?" "I have another job lined up in Montana. I'm supposed to be there by the end of the month." Of course she did. He'd known she traveled, that she didn't stay in one place. But hearing her say it, hearing the finality in her voice, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Montana's a long way," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "It is." Rose looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "The thing is, I find myself not wanting to go." Hope, sharp and unexpected, flared in Wade's chest. "Then don't." "Wade, I can't just stay. I have commitments, people expecting me." "Send them a telegram. Tell them something came up." He stepped closer to her, close enough to see the pulse beating at the base of her throat. "Rose, I know we've only known each other a little over a week, but I can't remember the last time I talked to someone the way I talked to you. Can't remember the last time I looked forward to every evening the way I look forward to our dinners. I find myself making excuses to walk past the corral just to catch a glimpse of you working with Midnight." Rose's breath caught. "Wade, I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking you to consider staying a while longer. Finish working with Midnight, make sure he's solid, and maybe see where this goes, whatever this is between us." "You feel it too," Rose whispered. "I feel it. Have been feeling it since the first day you rode up to my ranch." Wade reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, warm and strong. "Rose Fallon, name your price and stay." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Rose felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She'd been alone for so long, moving from place to place, never allowing herself to want more than the next job, the next horse to gentle. But Wade was offering her something she'd stopped letting herself dream about: a place to stay, a reason to stop running. "I don't want your money," she said softly. "Then what do you want?" "Time. Time to see if what we're feeling is real or just, I don't know, proximity and convenience." Wade smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I can give you time, all the time you need." They stood there in the moonlight, hands joined, neither speaking, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them. Finally, Rose squeezed his hand and stepped back. "I should sleep. Big day tomorrow." "Rose, wait." Wade hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for considering staying." Rose touched the spot where his lips had been, her heart racing. "Thank you for asking." She lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling of the cabin, her mind whirling. Montana, with its promise of good pay and new challenges, suddenly seemed less appealing than the possibility of staying here, of seeing where things went with Wade, of maybe, possibly finding a home. The next morning, Rose entered Midnight's corral with a saddle blanket. The stallion watched her approach, calm and trusting now. She laid the blanket across his back, let him feel the weight of it, talking to him all the while in that soft, steady voice. Midnight shifted but didn't protest. After a while, Rose removed the blanket and led him around the corral, rewarding him with gentle words and touches. Wade watched from the fence, Frank beside him. "She's got a gift," the foreman said quietly. "Never seen anything like it." "No," Wade agreed. "Neither have I." Over the next 2 days, Rose gradually introduced Midnight to the saddle, first just letting him see it and smell it, then placing it on his back for short periods, then finally cinching it properly. Each step was slow and careful, giving Midnight time to accept this new thing without fear. By the afternoon of the 10th day, Rose was ready to mount. A crowd had gathered, not just the ranch hands but some of the neighboring ranchers who'd heard about the woman gentling the killer horse. Wade stood closest to the corral, his hands gripping the fence so hard his knuckles were white. He trusted Rose, trusted her skill and knowledge, but Midnight was still a powerful animal, still capable of killing her if something went wrong. Rose led Midnight to the center of the corral, speaking softly to him, her hand steady on his neck. She put her foot in the stirrup, still talking, letting him feel her weight shifting. Midnight's ears flicked back and forth, but he stood steady. In one smooth motion, Rose swung herself into the saddle. For a moment, nothing happened. Horse and rider stood perfectly still, Rose's hand resting on Midnight's neck, her voice a low murmur. Then, with the gentlest pressure of her legs, Rose asked him to walk. Midnight walked. Around the corral they went, slow and steady, Rose's posture relaxed, her movements fluid. After a few circuits, she asked for a trot, and Midnight obliged, his gait smooth and even. When Rose finally brought him to a stop and dismounted, the watching crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Wade vaulted over the fence and strode toward her, his face split by a huge grin. Without thinking, he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, her laughter bright and surprised. When he set her down, they were standing close, his hands still on her waist, her hands resting on his chest. "You did it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We did it. Midnight did it." Rose smiled up at him, breathless from the ride and from his proximity. "He's going to be a wonderful horse, Wade. You just need to work with him the way I have. Patient, gentle, respectful. Teach me," Wade said impulsively. "Stay and teach me how to work with him your way." "Wade, that could take weeks. Then take weeks. Take months. Rose, I meant what I said. Name your price and stay." Rose glanced around at the watching crowd, at the ranch hands grinning and nudging each other, at Frank who was watching with knowing eyes. "We should talk about this in private. Tonight, after dinner." Rose nodded, and Wade reluctantly released her, stepping back to give her space. The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulations and questions. The neighboring ranchers wanted to know if Rose would work with their difficult horses, offered to pay premium rates for her services. Rose answered politely but non-committally, too aware of Wade's eyes on her, of the conversation waiting for them that evening. Dinner was a quiet affair. Maria had outdone herself, preparing roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes, fresh greens from the garden, and a berry pie for dessert. But neither Wade nor Rose did justice to the meal, both too preoccupied with what would come after. Finally, Maria cleared the dishes and bid them good night, her eyes twinkling with obvious understanding. Wade led Rose out to the front porch of the main house, where two rocking chairs sat facing west toward the mountains. They sat, the evening air cool and pleasant, the sky beginning its nightly transformation from blue to gold to purple. "I sent a telegram today," Rose said quietly, "to the ranch in Montana, told them I couldn't take the job." Wade's heart leaped, but he kept his voice steady. "What made you decide?" "I've been running for 3 years, Wade, ever since my father died, moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to feel anything. I told myself it was because I loved the freedom, the variety of the work, but the truth is I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Rose turned to look at him, her green eyes serious. "Afraid of staying somewhere and it not being home, afraid of caring about people who might leave or die, afraid of wanting something and not being able to have it." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But being here, working with Midnight, spending time with you, it made me realize something. Running doesn't protect you from pain. It just guarantees you'll be alone when the pain comes anyway." Wade reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. "You don't have to be alone, Rose. I know that now. Or at least, I'm starting to believe it." She laced her fingers through his. "So here's my price, Wade Norwood. I'll stay and work with you and Midnight, teach you everything my father taught me about gentling horses. But in return, I need you to be patient with me while I learn how to stop running, while I figure out how to stay in one place and let myself care about people again. That's not a price, Rose. That's a gift." Wade stood and pulled her gently to her feet, drawing her close. "And I'll be as patient as you need me to be. Take all the time in the world." Rose looked up at him, this man she'd known for less than 2 weeks but who somehow felt more real and solid than anyone she'd known in years. "Can I ask one more thing? Anything? Kiss me. For real this time." Wade's answer was to lower his head and capture her lips with his. The kiss started gentle, almost tentative, but quickly deepened as Rose wound her arms around his neck and pressed closer. Wade's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks, and Rose felt something inside her that had been locked tight for 3 years finally begin to open. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Rose Fallon. I know it's too soon to say that, I know we barely know each other, but it's the truth and I won't hide it from you." Rose's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time. "It's not too soon. I'm falling in love with you too. I think I started the first night when you said you'd pay for Midnight's piece even if you could never ride him. That's when I knew you were different." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally separated, Wade kept his arms around her, unwilling to let her go. "Stay with me tonight, not like that," he added quickly, feeling her tense slightly. "Just stay, talk with me, let me hold you. I'm not ready for this day to end." Rose relaxed into his embrace. "Neither am I." They sat together in one of the rocking chairs, Rose tucked against Wade's chest, his arms around her, and talked long into the night. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Wade told her about the loneliness of running the ranch alone, the pressure of living up to his father's legacy, his fear that he'd never find someone who truly understood the life he'd chosen. Rose told him about the grief of losing her father, the aimlessness that had followed, the way she'd used work to avoid dealing with her emotions. "I want to build something lasting," Wade said as the night deepened around them. "Not just the ranch, though that matters too, but a life, a family. I want what my grandparents had, what my parents had before my mother decided she hated it here. I want a partner, not just a wife. Someone who understands this life, who loves it the way I do." "I understand it," Rose said softly, "and I do love it. The land, the horses, the hard work, and the simple pleasures. I never wanted a city life, never wanted to be a lady who sits in parlors drinking tea and gossiping. I want dirt under my nails and the sun on my face and horses to care for." "Then we want the same things." "We do." Rose tilted her head back to look at him. "Wade, I need you to know something. I'm not a conventional woman. I wear split skirts and I work with horses and I have opinions about things ladies aren't supposed to have opinions about. Some people in town are going to talk, are going to say you could do better than some itinerant horse trainer with no family and no connections." Wade's arms tightened around her. "Let them talk. I don't give a damn what anyone thinks except you and me. And Rose, you are the best. You're kind and skilled and intelligent and beautiful, and anyone who can't see that is a fool." They fell silent for a while, content just to be close, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Finally, reluctantly, Wade walked Rose back to her cabin, kissing her good night at the door with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "Tomorrow," he said, "I want to try working with Midnight myself, with you teaching me." "Tomorrow," Rose agreed, and went inside with a lightness in her heart she hadn't felt in years. The next several weeks passed in a golden haze of work and growing love. Rose worked with Wade every day, teaching him her methods, showing him how to read a horse's body language, how to communicate through gentle touches and calm energy rather than force and dominance. Wade was an attentive student, his years of experience giving him a foundation to build on, Rose's techniques refining his natural skill. Midnight responded beautifully to Wade's new approach, and within a month, Wade was riding the Stallion as easily as Rose had. The horse had transformed from a dangerous, broken creature into a magnificent, spirited but trusting mount. Neighboring ranchers started bringing their difficult horses to the ranch, willing to pay good money for Rose's expertise, and she found herself building a reputation throughout the region. But more than the professional success, Rose found herself building a life. She moved her few belongings from the guest cabin into the main house, into Wade's room, and they navigated the intimate daily rhythms of sharing space with the wonder of people who'd both thought they'd always be alone. They cooked together, worked together, read poetry aloud to each other in the evenings. They rode out across the ranch land, Wade showing Rose every corner of his domain, and she fell in love not just with him but with the place itself, with the stark beauty of the California high desert, with the mountains that loomed purple and majestic in every direction. In October, Wade asked Rose to marry him. There was no fancy proposal, no ring yet, though he promised to get her one when they next went to town. He simply turned to her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset and said, "Marry me, Rose. Make this official. Be my wife, my partner in all things." Rose didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married in November in the small church in Lone Pine, with Frank as Wade's best man and Maria as Rose's witness. Rose wore a simple white dress Maria had helped her sew, and Wade wore his best suit, brushed and pressed within an inch of its life. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed Rose with a joy that made everyone in attendance smile. The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching was hard work, subject to the whims of weather and market prices, and there were lean times when they had to stretch every dollar. But there were also good times, prosperous years when the cattle sold well and Rose's horse training business brought in steady income. They added onto the main house, building a proper training arena and guest stables for the horses Rose worked with. In the spring of 1884, Rose discovered she was pregnant. Wade was overjoyed, already planning the nursery, talking about whether they'd have a son or daughter, what they'd name the child. Rose was excited but also nervous, remembering that her own mother had died in childbirth. But Wade held her close and promised that everything would be fine, that he'd be with her every step of the way. Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with Wade's blue eyes and Rose's auburn hair. They named him William Thomas, after Wade's father and grandfather, and called him Will. Wade cried when he first held his son, overwhelmed with love and gratitude, and Rose watched him with a fullness in her heart she'd never imagined possible. Motherhood suited Rose, though she'd worried it might not. She found she could balance caring for Will with her horsework, often carrying him in a sling as she worked in the training arena, letting him grow up with the smell of horses and leather, the sound of her calm voice as she gentled the difficult animals that came to her. Wade was a devoted father, taking over night duties when he could, playing with Will for hours, teaching him about the ranch almost from the moment he could walk. 2 years after Will's birth, Rose had twins, a boy and a girl they named Jacob and Emma. The ranch house was suddenly full of noise and chaos and laughter, and both Wade and Rose thrived in the midst of it. Frank had retired by then, his foreman duties taken over by Jimmy, who'd grown from a cocky boy into a capable young man, in no small part due to Rose's patient teaching about horses and Wade's mentorship about leadership. The children grew up strong and capable, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores as soon as they were able, listening to their mother's stories about their grandfather in Wyoming and their father's tales of building the ranch. Will was quiet and thoughtful like his father, with a special gift for understanding horses that reminded Wade of Rose. Jacob was adventurous and bold, always climbing trees and exploring the far corners of the ranch. Emma was a perfect blend of her parents, possessing Wade's determination and Rose's gentleness, and from an early age, she declared she would take over the ranch someday. In 1890, A telegram arrived from Montana, from the ranch Rose had turned down 8 years earlier. They'd heard about her reputation and wanted to offer her a training position, top dollar, a permanent position if she wanted it. Rose read the telegram and then showed it to Wade, who read it with raised eyebrows. "It's a good offer," he said carefully. "It is," Rose agreed. Then she took the telegram and tossed it into the fire. "But I already have everything I need right here." Wade pulled her close and kissed her, their 3 children playing at their feet. "I love you, Rose Norwood. I love you too." Rose rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Thank you for asking me to stay all those years ago, for seeing something in me worth keeping. Thank you for staying, for taking a chance on a lonely rancher and his broken horse." They stood together in the main house. They'd built into a home, surrounded by the life they'd created, and both understood that every choice had led them to this moment. Rose's decision to stop running, Wade's decision to trust a strange woman with his dangerous horse, their mutual willingness to take a risk on love. It had all woven together into something beautiful and lasting. As the years continued to pass, the ranch prospered. Rose's reputation as a horse trainer spread beyond California, and people came from as far as Oregon and Arizona to learn her methods. She trained not just horses but people, teaching her gentle techniques to anyone willing to listen. Wade expanded the cattle operation, built the ranch into one of the most successful in the region. But he never forgot the lessons Rose had taught him about patience and respect, and he applied them to everything he did, from dealing with his ranch hands to negotiating with buyers. Will grew into a young man with his mother's gift for horses and his father's head for business. At 18, he began taking on more responsibility at the ranch, working alongside Wade, learning everything his father could teach him. Jacob, restless and curious, left at 19 to see the world, promising to return, and Wade and Rose let him go with their blessing, understanding that some people needed to wander before they could settle. Emma stayed close to home, dividing her time between working with the horses and learning the business side from her father, proving herself every bit as capable as any son. In the summer of 1895, Jacob returned home with a wife, a schoolteacher from Colorado named Margaret, and announced his intention to build a house on ranch land and raise horses himself. Wade and Rose gave him a parcel of land on the eastern edge of the property, and Jacob built a small but sturdy house where he and Margaret started their own family. Will married in 1896 to a local girl named Sarah whom he'd known since childhood, and they moved into the old guest cabin, expanded and renovated into a proper home. The ranch that had once housed only Wade and his loneliness now sprawled across the land, multiple houses connected by family and shared work. Rose trained horses while her grandchildren played in the arena, watched over by whoever had a free moment. Wade, his hair now shot through with silver but his body still strong from decades of hard work, spent his days riding the range with his sons, planning the future of the ranch, secure in the knowledge that the legacy his grandfather had started would continue for generations. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Rose with a new horse, a young filly with lines as good as Midnight's had been. The stallion himself, now in his 20s, spent his days in a private pasture, retired and content, still coming when Rose called, still lowering his head for her to stroke his neck. "She needs a name," Wade said as Rose ran her hands over the filly's silky coat. "Sunrise," Rose decided. "Because she's the color of dawn, and because she represents new beginnings." Wade wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever regret it, staying here, giving up the traveling life?" Rose leaned back into his embrace, watching Sunrise prance in the corral, full of youth and energy and possibility. Not for a single moment. This is where I was always meant to be. With you, with our children, with our horses. This is home. You never told me your final price, Wade murmured into her hair. That first day you said $50 and room and board. But later you said you didn't want money. What was your real price? Rose turned in his arms to face him, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. They'd both aged. Both carried the marks of 20 years of hard work and good living, but when she looked at him, she still saw the lonely rancher who'd taken a chance on her, who'd asked her to stay, who'd offered her everything without knowing if she'd accept. Love, she said simply. My price was love, and you've paid it every single day since. Wade kissed her then, a long, slow kiss full of 20 years of shared life and the promise of however many more they'd be granted. When they finally separated, both were smiling. Come on, Rose said, taking his hand. Maria's making your favorite for dinner, and the grandchildren will be arriving soon. Emma promised to bring that new foal she's been working with. They walked back to the main house together, hand in hand, and Rose thought about that terrified girl who'd ridden onto this ranch 20 years ago, determined not to stay anywhere long enough to get hurt. She thought about the broken black stallion who'd taught her that sometimes the most damaged things could heal with the right care. She thought about Wade, who'd seen her value when she'd almost forgotten it herself, who'd asked her to stay and then spent 2 decades making her glad she had. Behind them, in the corral, Sunrise whinnied, young and wild and full of potential, just like Midnight had been. And Rose knew that tomorrow she'd begin the patient work of gentling her, of building trust, of showing her that humans could be kind. She'd do it the way her father had taught her, the way she'd taught Wade, the way she was now teaching their children and grandchildren. With patience, with respect, with love. That night, the main house was full of family. 3 generations gathered around the dinner table Maria had set with her usual care. Conversation flowed freely, children's laughter mixing with adult discussion of ranch business and local news. Rose looked around at the faces she loved, at the life she'd built, and felt a contentment so deep, it was almost physical. After dinner, after the dishes were cleared and the grandchildren had been taken home by their parents, after Maria had retired to her cottage, and the ranch had settled into nighttime quiet, Wade and Rose sat on their porch as they had countless times over the years. The stars wheeled overhead, brilliant and eternal, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied softly. You remember what you said? Rose asked quietly. That first night when you asked me to stay. I remember every word, Wade replied. I said name your price and stay. Best thing I ever said. Best thing I ever heard. Rose nestled closer to him, warm despite the cool night air. I was so scared, Wade, scared of staying, scared of caring, scared of losing something precious again. But you made it safe to stay. You made it safe to love. You did the same for me. I'd been alone so long, I'd convinced myself I was fine with it, that I didn't need anyone. Then you showed up with your quiet strength and your way with horses, and suddenly alone felt unbearable. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only comes from years of shared life, where words aren't always necessary because understanding runs deeper than speech. Rose thought about all the horses she'd gentled over the years, all the scared, damaged creatures she'd helped heal. In a way, she and Wade had gentled each other, had shown each other that trust was possible, that love didn't have to end in loss, that home was something you built together through patience and care. I want to train Emma to take over the horse work, Rose said eventually. Will's got the ranch business down, Jacob's building his own operation, but Emma, she's got the gift. Really got it. I see the way she is with the difficult ones, the patience she shows. She's ready to learn everything I know." Wade nodded. "She'll be honored. She looks up to you more than anyone. And I want to take on one more project, a big one." "What's that?" Rose pointed toward the southern pasture where a wild Mustang stallion was being temporarily held. He'd been captured causing trouble with the ranch horses, and the plan had been to sell him. "Him. He reminds me of Midnight. Same rage, same fear. I want to see if I can gentle him. One last big challenge before I'm too old for this work." Wade laughed, a warm sound in the darkness. "Rose, you'll never be too old. You'll be gentling horses when you're 90. Maybe, but this one, I want him to be special. A legacy project, something I can pass on to Emma, show her the full process from start to finish." "Then let's keep him. What will you name him?" Rose considered. "Storm. Because he's wild and dangerous and beautiful, and because I think we can turn his wildness into strength rather than breaking it." Over the following months, Rose worked with Storm while Emma watched and learned. It was slower going than Midnight had been, Storm being even more damaged, even more distrustful. But Rose was patient, and Emma proved herself an apt student, absorbing not just the techniques but the philosophy behind them. By the spring of 1896, Storm was gentled enough to handle, though he remained spirited, never fully docile. Rose considered that a success. She'd never wanted to break spirits, only to redirect them, to show these powerful creatures that they could be strong and free even within the partnership with humans. On a warm May morning, Rose and Wade rode out together, she on Storm and he on Midnight Sun, a beautiful gray stallion named Thunder. They rode to the far northern edge of the ranch, to a spot where a natural spring created a small oasis of green in the desert landscape. It had become their special place over the years, somewhere they came when they needed to escape the bustle of ranch life, when they wanted to be alone together. They dismounted and let the horses graze while they sat by the spring, their backs against a smooth boulder, Wade's arm around Rose's shoulders. "I've been thinking," Wade said, "about the future, about what happens when we're gone." "Morbid thoughts for such a beautiful day," Rose teased gently. "Not morbid. Practical. The ranch will go to Will, that's understood. Jacob's building his own legacy on his parcel, but I want to make sure you're protected, that your work is protected. I want to set aside land specifically for the horse training operation, make it officially part of the ranch business. Ensure that Emma and her children after her will always have a place to continue what you've built." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 20 years, Wade still found ways to show her she was valued, that her work mattered. "That's a beautiful thought. It's more than a thought. I've already talked to the lawyer in town, drew up papers. The southeastern 40 acres, where the training arena and stables are, that'll be designated as the Rose Norwood Equine Center. Ownership passes to Emma, then to her heirs. It'll never be sold, never be broken up. Your legacy, protected forever." Rose turned to Wade, cupping his face in her hands. "How did I get so lucky? How did I find you? You didn't find me. You saved me." Wade covered her hands with his. "I was becoming bitter, Rose. Lonely and bitter and convinced I'd always be alone. You showed me another way. You showed me that patience and gentleness could achieve more than force in horses and in life. You gave me a family, gave me love, gave me purpose beyond just keeping the ranch running. You saved me as surely as you saved Midnight." They kissed, soft and sweet, the kiss of long-married lovers who'd weathered everything together and come out stronger. Around them, the California wilderness spread in all directions, beautiful and harsh and alive. The horses grazed peacefully nearby, Storm and Thunder, tamed wildness and bred strength, symbols of everything Rose and Wade had built together. "We should get back," Rose said eventually, reluctantly. "Maria will have lunch ready, and Emma was bringing the foal over for evaluation." "5 more minutes," Wade bargained. "Just 5 more minutes of this, just you and me and the quiet." Rose settled back against him. 5 more minutes. But they sat there for an hour, neither willing to break the spell of peace and contentment, both understanding that these moments were precious, that life was made up of such moments, collected and treasured and remembered. The years continued their steady march. Will and Sarah had 4 children, adding to the growing family. Jacob and Margaret had 3. Emma married a horse trainer who came to learn from Rose and ended up staying, a quiet man named David who shared Emma's gentle way with animals. They had 2 children, both girls, who showed signs of inheriting their grandmother's gift. Rose trained horses and people, her reputation becoming almost legendary in California. The Rose Norwood Equine Center became known throughout the West as the place to bring difficult horses, where miracles happened, where rage and fear were transformed into trust and partnership. Rose wrote a book about her methods, at Wade's urging, and though she was self-conscious about her lack of formal education, the book became popular among horse trainers and owners, spreading her philosophy far beyond what she could achieve in person. Wade remained active in ranch management well into his 60s, though he gradually ceded more authority to Will, trusting his son to carry on the family legacy. He spent more time working alongside Rose, learning the finer points of her training methods, and discovered he had a knack for the teaching side, often working with the owners who brought their horses to the center, helping them understand that the problem usually wasn't the horse but their own approach. In the summer of 1905, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a huge gathering, children and grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren filling the ranch. A photographer from town came to take pictures, capturing the family in formal poses and candid moments. Rose looked at those photographs later and marveled at what they represented. From one lonely woman and one lonely man and one broken horse, all of this had grown. Family, legacy, love that had multiplied and spread like ripples in a pond. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Wade led Rose to the barn where Midnight lived out his final years. The stallion was ancient now, nearly 30 years old, moving slowly but still alert, still coming to Rose's call. She stroked his neck, this horse who'd brought her to Wade, who'd been the catalyst for everything that followed. "Thank you," she whispered to Midnight. "Thank you for teaching me about patience. Thank you for being so broken that only I could fix you, because if you'd been easier, I might not have stayed long enough to fall in love." Midnight lowered his head, pressing his forehead against Rose's chest, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, saying goodbye though neither of them knew it would be for the last time. The old stallion died peacefully in his sleep 3 nights later, and they buried him on the hill overlooking the ranch, under an oak tree that had stood longer than any of them had been alive. Rose grieved, but it was a clean grief, unmarred by regret. Midnight had lived a good long life after his salvation, had sired strong foals, had known kindness and peace. It was all anyone could hope for, horse or human. The second decade of the new century brought changes. Automobiles started appearing, though horses remained essential for ranch work. The world felt like it was speeding up, but on the Norwood Ranch, life maintained its steady rhythm of seasons and work and family. Wade's hair went fully white, and Rose's auburn braid showed threads of silver, but both remained strong and active, refusing to fully retire. In 1912, on a crisp October morning much like the one when they'd first met 30 years earlier, Rose and Wade rode out together to their spot by the spring. They were both in their 60s now, but they sat their horses with the ease of lifelong riders, bodies still strong from daily work. "I never thanked you properly," Wade said as they sat by the water. "For what? For staying. For choosing this life, this ranch, me. You could have gone anywhere, done anything. You had a gift that would have taken you all over the country, but you stayed." Rose took his hand, lacing their fingers together, calloused palm against calloused palm. "Wade, you're still not understanding. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was the easiest choice I ever made. You asked me to name my price and stay, and my price was love, and you've paid it every single day for 30 years. I got everything I wanted. Love, family, meaningful work, a home. I got you. I got you too. Best deal I ever made." Wade raised their joined hands and kissed her knuckles. "I want you to know, Rose, that every day with you has been a gift. Every single day. Even the hard ones, even the ones where we fought or struggled or worried about money or children. All of it has been worth it because I got to do it with you. We have a good life," Rose said softly. "A really good life. We do, and it's not over yet. We've got years left, you and me. Years of watching grandchildren grow, of training horses, of sitting on our porch and watching the sunset. Years of loving each other." Rose leaned her head on his shoulder, looking out at the land they'd worked together, the legacy they'd built. In the distance, she could see the ranch buildings, could see tiny figures moving around, children and grandchildren going about their work. The Rose Norwood Equine Center stood proud, several horses in various stages of training visible in the paddocks. Smoke rose from the chimneys of multiple houses, each one home to a branch of their growing family tree. "You remember Storm?" Rose asked. "Of course. Mean old cuss. You gentled him, but he never was fully friendly to anyone but you and Emma. He died last month. Emma buried him next to midnight." Wade squeezed her hand. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." "Don't be. He had 15 good years after we saved him. Sired some fine foals, including Dawn, who Emma's daughter is working with now. His blood continues just like Midnight's, just like ours, through our children and grandchildren. Legacy," Wade said. "That's what we've built. Not just in blood, but in philosophy, in the way we've taught our family to treat animals and each other. That's the real inheritance we're leaving." They sat for a long time in comfortable silence, two people who'd built a life together from nothing but trust and patience and love. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, they mounted their horses and rode back to the ranch, back to the family and life they'd created, back to home. The years that followed were gentle, peaceful. Wade and Rose gradually retired from active work, though neither ever truly stopped. Wade advised Will on ranch decisions, helped negotiate sales, maintained relationships with buyers and suppliers. Rose continued to train horses, though she left the difficult cases to Emma, content to work with gentler animals, to teach the great-grandchildren who were old enough to learn. They spent their evenings on the porch they'd sat on for decades, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking or silent depending on their mood. Sometimes their children or grandchildren joined them, but often it was just the two of them, content in each other's company, needing nothing more than proximity and the shared understanding of a life well lived together. In the spring of 1918, Wade fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it progressed to pneumonia despite the doctor's best efforts. Rose stayed by his bedside for 3 weeks, rarely sleeping, holding his hand and talking to him, reminding him of their life together, of all the good times, of the family they'd built. "I'm not ready to leave you," Wade rasped one evening, his voice weak but his grip on her hand still strong. "Then don't," Rose said fiercely. Fight, Wade, fight to stay with me. I'm trying. God knows I'm trying. His blue eyes, faded now but still clear, fixed on her face. But Rose, if I can't, if this is it, I need you to know something. Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. Rose, listen. Wade struggled to sit up slightly, and she helped him, propping pillows behind him. I need you to know that loving you, being loved by you, it was the greatest honor of my life. You made me better, made me kinder, made me wiser. Everything good in my life came from the day you rode onto this ranch and gentled that devil horse. Tears streamed down Rose's face. Wade, please. Please don't leave me. I don't want to, but if I must, promise me you'll be okay. Promise me you'll keep living, keep training horses, keep loving our family. Don't let grief make you stop living. I can't promise that. I can't imagine life without you. Wade raised his hand, weak but determined, and cupped her cheek. Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I've ever known. You'll grieve, but you'll survive. And you'll keep our legacy alive, keep teaching our philosophy to anyone who'll listen. Promise me, Rose. Through her tears, Rose nodded. I promise. But you're not dying, Wade Norwood. You're too stubborn for that. Wade smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart 33 years earlier. I love you, Rose Fallon Norwood, from that first day to this last. Not last, Rose insisted. Not last, just another day. We have more time, Wade. We have more sunsets to watch, more grandchildren to meet, more years together. But despite her fierce insistence, despite the doctor's efforts, despite the prayers of their family, Wade's body couldn't fight off the infection. He died 3 days later with Rose holding his hand, surrounded by children and grandchildren, slipping away peacefully in his sleep. Rose's grief was profound, a physical ache that made breathing difficult. She'd lost her father, had known deep loss before, but losing Wade was different. He'd been her partner in everything, her best friend, her lover, her anchor for more than 3 decades. The ranch felt empty without him, the porch too quiet, the bed too large. But she'd made him a promise, and Rose Fallon Norwood kept her promises. She grieved deeply but didn't let grief consume her. She continued working with horses, though more slowly now, with less energy. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, and growing number of great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive and vibrant. Emma took over more of the equine center's operations, proving herself every bit as capable as Rose had known she'd be. Will ran the ranch with the same integrity and wisdom Wade had shown, making his father proud. Jacob's operation had become substantial in its own right, a second Norwood ranch that maintained the family values and practices. The years after Wade's death were bittersweet for Rose. She missed him every day, felt his absence like a missing limb, but she also felt his presence in everything around her. In the horses that carried his breeding, in the grandchildren who had his eyes or his smile, in the land he'd loved and protected and passed on. Their legacy lived in every corner of the ranch, in the continued success of the equine center, in the family that kept growing and thriving. Rose lived to be 83 years old, remaining active and engaged until nearly the end. She trained her last horse at 80, a spirited mare that everyone said couldn't be gentled, and proved them wrong just as she'd been proving people wrong her entire life. She wrote a second book, a memoir of her life with Wade and her years of horse training that became even more popular than the first. She saw the birth of her first great-great-grandchild, a little girl named Rose after her, who showed signs even in infancy of having the same gentle way with animals. On a warm evening in June of 1930, Rose sat on the porch of the main house, surrounded by 4 generations of family. They'd gathered for a reunion, the ranch once again filled with Norwoods and their spouses and children. Rose held tiny Rose in her lap, the baby sleeping peacefully, and looked out at the crowd of people who'd come from her and Wade's union. 48 years had passed since she'd ridden onto this ranch, terrified and alone and running from grief. 48 years since Wade had offered her a chance, had asked her to stay, had given her time to learn how to stop running. In those 48 years, she'd built a life beyond anything she'd dreamed possible. She'd loved and been loved, had created a legacy that would outlast her by generations, had proven that patience and gentleness could change the world, one horse and one person at a time. That night, after everyone had gone to their various homes and beds, Rose sat alone on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead just as she and Wade had done countless times. She felt tired, bone-deep tired, but content. Satisfied with the life she'd lived, the choices she'd made, the love she'd known. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the night, to Wade's memory. "I kept living, I kept loving, I kept our legacy alive, but I'm ready now if you're waiting for me. Ready to see you again, to hold your hand, to spend eternity with you." Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep that night, and though her family grieved, they also celebrated a life well lived, a legacy well earned. She was buried next to Wade on the hill under the oak tree, where midnight and storm and all the horses she'd saved over the years also rested. The entire town of Lone Pine turned out for her funeral, along with people from across California and beyond, horse trainers and owners who'd learned from her, whose lives she'd touched. The Rose Norwood Equine Center continued under Emma's leadership, and later under Emma's daughter, and after that under little Rose when she came of age. The techniques Rose had developed, the philosophy she'd championed, spread across the country and eventually the world, changing how people worked with horses, emphasizing partnership over domination, patience over force. The Norwood Ranch continued to prosper, generation after generation, maintained by Wade and Rose's descendants, all of whom learned the story of how it had grown from a lonely rancher and a wandering horse trainer, and one black stallion no man could touch. They learned about the day Wade had asked Rose to name her price and stay, about how Rose had asked for love and received it in abundance, about how two damaged people had healed each other, just as Rose had healed so many damaged horses. The story became family legend, passed down through the years, embellished and refined until it took on the quality of myth. But at its heart remained the simple truth that love, real and patient and enduring, could transform anything. That taking a chance on someone, on something, could change the course of multiple lives. That staying, despite fear and uncertainty, was sometimes the bravest choice of all. And every evening, as the sun set over the California high desert, painting the mountains purple and gold, the current residents of the Norwood Ranch would pause in their work and remember Rose and Wade, the foundation upon which everything had been built. They'd think about that black stallion named Midnight, about patience and gentleness, about the day a woman rode onto the ranch and stayed, building a legacy that would last forever.